It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, just as I set my coffee mug down and sank into my worn-out office chair. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another robocall, but something in my gut twisted before I even answered. "Hello? This is Lisa Hudson," I said cautiously. The voice on the other end was clipped, polite in the way people are when they have bad news to deliver. He introduced himself as being from Northwest Federal Bank in Houston and said they were calling regarding my mortgage account. For a second, I thought he had the wrong person, but then he calmly read off my full name, my date of birth, and my social security number, like a list of accusations. My pen froze in my hand when he mentioned the number, $480,000. He said the account had been overdue for months. I laughed at first, a strange dry sound that hurt coming out, and told him I didn't even own a house. But he insisted, his voice unshaken. I hung up eventually, but the damage was already done. The words stayed echoing in my ears. A mortgage. My name. $480,000. It made no sense. My whole life was sitting right in front of me. A small apartment in Seattle. A 10-year-old Honda Civic. A pile of student loans I had been chipping away at for years. I had never signed anything like that. I opened my email with shaking hands and requested copies of whatever documents they claimed to have. While I waited, a sick feeling started in my stomach and spread until my hands were cold. In that silence, I thought of my family. My brother Todd's face flashed in my mind, the way he'd been talking about buying a bigger house in Texas a few years ago, even when everyone knew he couldn't afford one. He had always been the risk-taker, and I had always been the responsible one, the safe net everyone assumed would be there. Now the phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my hand. I stared at the blank screen, already suspecting deep down that this wasn't a mistake at all. It was betrayal. The email from the bank came less than an hour later, a PDF attachment sitting there like a bomb waiting to go off. I clicked it open, telling myself it had to be a mistake, maybe a different Lisa Hudson, maybe some weird computer error. But the second the document filled my screen, my chest tightened. There it was in black and white. My name, my birth date, my social security number, all over dozens of pages. And then I saw the signature. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. It was neat, careful, like someone had studied the loops and slants of my handwriting and rehearsed it until it looked close enough to fool anyone who didn't really know me. But I knew. I knew the way my hand shakes a little when I'm tired. I knew the way I always press too hard on the last letter. Whoever did this didn't know those things. I scrolled through page after page, feeling my breath shorten with every one. The loan had been signed 3 years ago. The house was in Austin, Texas. And somewhere inside me, a horrible connection started to form. 3 years ago, Todd had been talking about how renting was a waste of money, how he deserved a place with a backyard, a grill, a home office. He'd shown me pictures. Big, airy places with tall ceilings that I knew were out of his reach. Back then, I thought it was just another dream he'd chase until it crumbled, like all the others. Now I wondered if that dream had come true, only at my expense. I closed the laptop and pressed the heels of my hands to my eyes, trying to slow my thoughts, but the memories came anyway. Todd showing up at family dinners with a new truck, always with an excuse about how it was a great deal. My parents looking at him like he hung the moon, like there was nothing he couldn't have if we all just pitched in. And me, the dependable sister, the one they never asked because they assumed I'd just take it, for the first time in my life. The weight of that role felt like a trap I had walked into without even realizing. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling of my apartment, the glow of the streetlight sneaking through the blinds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that forged signature, neat and perfect, over and over again. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on rest and got up, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, as if that could hold me together. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and started digging through every old folder, every file I had kept over the years, searching for anything that might tell me how far this had gone. There were letters from credit card companies, old tax returns, bank statements, and in between them things I hadn't thought about in years. And then I found it. A soft copy of a pre-approval notice I'd thrown away 2 years ago, addressed to me but mentioning a property in Texas. I had brushed it off back then as a mistake, but now I could see it for what it was. The first shadow of a theft I hadn't even noticed. Page after page, I started piecing together the timeline. Somewhere along the way, someone had been using my name, my credit, like it was theirs. It wasn't a random hacker. This was too deliberate. It was someone who knew me, who counted on me not paying attention. By the time the first light of morning pushed its way through the blinds, the table in front of me was covered in papers. My hands were shaking, not just from exhaustion, but from something heavier. Betrayal. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about knowing that my life, everything I had built on my own, had been stolen right out from under me by the people who were supposed to protect me. I pressed my forehead against the table and let the anger sit there, sharp and cold. Somewhere deep inside me, a decision was already forming. This time, I wasn't going to let them get away with it. By Sunday evening, I was standing on the front porch of my parents' house in Houston, staring at the door like it was a wall between 2 versions of my life. Inside, I could already hear the sound of silverware and the faint buzz of a football game. When my mother opened the door, her smile was wide and warm, as if everything in our family had always been perfect. For a while, I played along, sitting at the table with my dad grumbling at the TV and Todd scrolling on his phone, while the smell of roast chicken filled the house. It was almost easy to believe I was just visiting home. Almost. We ate dinner in that familiar rhythm, with my mother fussing over Todd's plate and asking about his work, my dad barely looking up from the screen, and me mostly invisible. It was only after the dishes were cleared that I finally said what I came to say. "I have a question," I began, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Does anyone know anything about a mortgage that has my name on it?" For a moment there was complete silence. Todd's phone froze mid-scroll. My mother's smile faltered. My father set his fork down slowly, and then I saw it in their faces. The guilt, the recognition, the hope that I wouldn't push any further. "Lisa, sweetheart," my mother said softly, reaching across the table as if this were some misunderstanding we could smooth over. "It's not as bad as it sounds. Todd just needed a little help qualifying for a loan. You're strong. You have good credit. He doesn't. We were going to tell you." Todd cut in, his tone defensive. "It's just paperwork, Lisa. It's not like you're actually paying anything." I sat back, letting the words settle like ash. They didn't even think they'd done something wrong. They had turned my life into a piece of paper, and now they were looking at me like I was the unreasonable one. I nodded slowly, keeping my voice calm. "Thank you for explaining," I said, and for the rest of the night I stayed silent. But inside me, something was breaking free. The drive back to my apartment that night felt like moving through a fog. Streetlights smeared across the windshield in long yellow streaks, but I barely saw them. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. The silence in the car so loud it seemed to press against my ears. I kept hearing their voices over and over, like a loop I couldn't shut off. It's just paperwork. You're strong. It's not like you're actually paying anything. The way they said it so casually, as if tying me to nearly $500,000 of debt without my knowledge, was some small favor I was supposed to be proud of, cut deeper than shouting ever could. I replayed every word, every look at that table. Not once had anyone apologized. Not once had they acknowledged that what they had done was wrong. Instead, they had stared at me like I was ungrateful, like I should be thanking them for including me in their plans. It hit me then, with a clarity I hadn't wanted to see before. For them, this wasn't betrayal. This was normal. This was just what family did. They had built their whole lives on the assumption that I would always be there to carry the weight, to fix things, to quietly sacrifice while they excused each other, and I had been doing it for years, without even noticing how much it cost me. By the time I pulled into the dark parking lot of my apartment building, my hands had stopped shaking. I turned off the engine and sat there in the quiet, watching the dashboard lights fade one by one. I felt like something inside me had snapped, not with rage, but with a cold, deliberate kind of resolve. They thought I was the safe one, the quiet one who never fought back. They thought I would just swallow this like I had swallowed everything else. They didn't realize that tonight was the last time I would let them decide who I was. I wasn't going to scream, but I wasn't going to stay silent either. The next morning, I called in to work and told my boss I needed a personal day. My voice must have sounded different, because she didn't ask questions. I spent the early hours gathering everything I had collected over the past 2 days. Emails from the bank, the forged mortgage documents, credit reports with sudden drops I had never understood. Then I drove to a small office building in Houston, where a real estate attorney named Mr. Richardson had agreed to meet me. The receptionist led me into a quiet conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and paper, and I sat there staring at my hands until the door opened and he walked in, an older man with sharp eyes and a calm, steady presence. I pushed the stack of documents across the table, watching as he examined them page by page. His expression barely changed, but every now and then his brow furrowed slightly. When he was done, he placed the papers neatly in front of him and folded his hands. "You understand what this means, right?" he asked, his voice even. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is fraud. Identity theft. It's a criminal matter." Hearing those words out loud was like a punch to the chest, but I nodded. "I understand," I said quietly. "I just need to know what to do." Over the next hour, he laid it all out for me. File a police report immediately. Send a formal dispute to the bank along with the report. Begin the process to have my name legally removed from the loan. And if necessary, sue. For damages, for restitution, for whatever it took to get my life back. He warned me that it wouldn't be quick or easy. It would almost certainly destroy what was left of my relationship with my family. I listened to every word, writing down each step carefully. By the end, something inside me felt steadier than it had in days. I wasn't doing this to them. I was doing this for me. As I shook his hand and walked out into the bright Houston sunlight, I knew exactly what my next step would be. The police station smelled faintly of coffee and old paperwork, a mix of metal file cabinets and worn linoleum. I stood at the front desk, holding my folder so tightly that my fingers had gone numb. When the officer asked what I needed, I said it without hesitation. "I need to file a report for identity theft." My voice was calm, almost detached, like I had rehearsed these words 100 times. He led me to a small desk where the fluorescent light buzzed overhead and asked me to start from the beginning. I slid the folder across to him and explained everything. The forged mortgage, the bank's confirmation, the signatures that weren't mine. He flipped through the papers slowly, his eyes scanning each page. At one point, he glanced up, his voice quieter. "You sure you want to go through with this?" There was no hesitation in me anymore. "If I don't," I said, "they'll just keep taking from me." He nodded once, a kind of respect passing between us, and began filling out the report. By the time it was finished, he handed me a stamped copy and told me to keep it safe. That piece of paper felt heavier than it looked, like proof that I wasn't imagining any of it. As I walked out of the station into the warm Houston air, the sunlight felt sharper, cleaner, as if the city itself had shifted just a little. That afternoon, I went straight to the post office with the report in one hand and a formal dispute letter in the other. I addressed it to Northwest Federal Bank, attaching copies of every document and a demand to remove my name from the fraudulent loan. My signature on the letter this time was deliberate, each stroke of the pen sharp and certain. When the clerk stamped the envelope and slid it away, I stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. There was no taking it back now. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had done something that belonged to me, something that drew a line between what they had taken and what I was taking back. 3 days passed in silence after I mailed the letter. I thought, maybe they were waiting, hoping it would all just go away, until I saw my mother's car pull into the parking lot of my apartment complex late one afternoon. I watched her through the blinds for a long moment before opening the door. She didn't even say hello. She was already talking as soon as I cracked it open, her voice sharp and trembling. "Lisa, how could you do this? Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? The police, the bank, your own brother. You're tearing us apart." She looked smaller than I remembered, but her anger filled up the hallway. I stood there quietly while she went on, listing all the things Todd was going through, how scared they all were, how I had betrayed them by not understanding. She said it like I had choices they didn't, like I was supposed to carry the weight, because I was strong, and Todd wasn't. Finally, when she paused to catch her breath, I met her eyes. "No," I said softly but firmly. "Family asks. Family doesn't steal. You didn't ask me. You just decided what you thought I would do, and took everything from me." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words didn't come. For the first time, she seemed unsure. "You've ruined everything," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. "No," I said again, my hand on the edge of the door. "I just stopped cleaning up your messes." Her face went pale, the lines around her mouth tightening, but I didn't let her speak again. Without another word, I closed the door. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the room. I leaned against the wood, my heart pounding, not from regret, but from a kind of release I had never felt before. On the other side of that door, her footsteps retreated slowly down the hall, and for the first time, I felt the boundary between their chaos and my life hold firm. I didn't look out the window again until her car was gone. The weeks that followed felt like a slow uncoiling. A letter came from the bank first, confirming that the loan tied to my name had been suspended while they investigated. Then an email from Mr. Richardson with a list of next steps and updates on how the case would move forward. It was strange how something that had been so heavy just weeks ago was now shifting, like a boulder rolling away an inch at a time. I still had to answer emails and sign affidavits and send copies of every document, but the panic that had lived in my chest was starting to loosen its grip. I realized one morning, standing in the middle of my kitchen, that my hands weren't shaking anymore. The silence from my family was absolute. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. It was as if I had been erased, as if they had decided that pretending I didn't exist was easier than facing what they had done. At first, that quiet was almost unbearable. I would pick up my phone out of habit, ready to check for messages that never came, and each time it was blank, I felt a small ache. But after a while, the quiet turned into something else. It became a kind of space, and for the first time in a long time, I started to wonder what I could do with it. On Saturdays, I wandered through the farmer's market near my apartment, buying sunflowers and peaches I didn't need, just because I liked how they smelled. I started walking along the trails near Green Lake, where the early morning air tasted like pine and mist. On a whim, I signed up for a pottery class, and the first time my clumsy hands shaped a lump of wet clay into something that almost resembled a bowl, I laughed out loud, alone, and didn't care who heard. None of this fixed the damage they had done. But piece by piece it began to remind me that there was more to me than the mess they left behind. It was slow work, rebuilding myself. But every day I felt a little lighter. Almost a year passed before I saw them again. I had just come back from a local pottery fair, my arms full of mismatched mugs and bowls, when I saw them standing in front of my apartment building. My mother, my father, and Todd. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, the late afternoon sun throwing long shadows around them. They looked smaller than I remembered. Todd's hair was messy, his eyes darting like he was looking for an exit. My mother clutched her purse so tightly that her knuckles were white, and my father couldn't even bring himself to look at me. I didn't need to ask why they were here. I had heard through a neighbor that the house Todd had fought so hard to get was gone now, foreclosed, and with it everything they thought they had built. My mother stepped forward first, her voice shaky. "Lisa, please, we made a mistake, but we're still family. We just need some help to get back on our feet." Todd's voice followed, thin and desperate. "Just for a while, Lisa. I didn't know it would get this bad. Please don't turn your back on us." They weren't angry this time. They weren't shouting. They were asking, for once. And yet, I knew it wasn't love that brought them here. It was need. The same old pattern, only now stripped bare, with no more illusions left between us. I set my bags down on the step and looked at them. Really looked at them. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I spoke softly, steadily, so there was no chance they could misunderstand. "I hope one day you understand what family is supposed to be, but it's not something you can steal or fake or ask for, only when it's convenient. I'm done carrying this." I picked up my bags again and walked past them, hearing my mother's breath catch and Todd whisper my name. I didn't stop. At the stairs, I paused just long enough to feel the warm breeze on my face. "I'm free," I whispered to myself, and kept walking without looking back.